Hello and welcome, I'm Kiera, and today I'm going to be talking about books that I read and checklists and goals in the first part of the year. This is from January and March 2023, and yeah, I read 18 books, which is much lower than any number I had ever read before. We are going down in the numbers, but enjoying books just as much as I always have. Also, 5 of the books that I've read so far are rereads, and 6 of them are poetry, and 1 is a picture book. So I don't discount those as books any less, but I've only read 11 full novels this year, and 2 of them were novellas. So the amount of pages that I read I know are much less than normal, and for that reason my checklist is not going to be very complete. I appreciate goals more as goals and ambitions than something that I need to check off. I am not very harsh on myself for failing books, but I like the reminder of what my goals are, and I love checking off lists. It's very fun for me. I read 10 books in January, and I read 3 in February, and 5 in March. So when these aren't completely full, you'll understand why. But the list that I have, I'll go through and I'll kind of talk about what I did in that month. So the first check thing that I have is a book by Indigenous author. I'm not always the best at reading Indigenous authors, and I think that is really important and a reminder for myself. So I did read one in January and February. In February, I read Bad Cree, and it is a new favorite, and I'm really, really excited for it, and I love it so much, so that makes me really happy. And then my second goal is a 20th century classic, and I read this in January and March. I read Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. I thought that I would hate this book, and I loved it, which was such a surprise. And then I did read American Primitive by Mary Oliver. My next goal is to read a pre-20th century classic, so this means any book that's published before 1900, and I love this because, you know, whether I want to read a Greek book or Shakespeare or a Victorian or Regency novel, they all follow in there, and I like being able to read older classics, and I have a lot of love for a lot of books. So I did not do this at all. I actually only read 2 classics so far, which is very surprising as it's been my biggest genre in many years, especially in 2021 and 2022. I tend to read about 40 classics, so the fact that this is so small is very surprising to me. The next one is a collection of poetry, and I'm so happy. I've read 6 of them. I read in January and March, and technically I didn't read one in February, but several of the books that I finished, including American Primitive and Crow that I've been working on, I started in February. 2 of my favorite poetry collections of all time I reread, and this is Phantom Pains by Therese Escon and Dearly by Margaret Atwood. Both of them are incredible. Phantom Pains looks at disability and the way that able-bodied gaze kind of looks at you and makes you not feel like a full human, and it combines this with Visayan mythology and folklore and the ways that we tell our stories so well. It is beautiful. And Dearly is a book that I really love. I really especially like the second half, but I like all of it. It has some work that she'd written earlier in her life that had not been published, and then the last few really looks at grief so evocatively. It looks at her losing her partner of 35 years and him having dementia, so she's kind of losing him even before he's gone, and those images will stick in my mind forever. I read it originally in 2020, and rereading it in 2023 was just beautiful. The next one I really failed on. I did not read a Latinx novel at all, and this is the people group that I consistently miss, and I will talk more about it in the end, books that I want to read to remedy some of the rules that I've not been finishing. The next one is to read a play or short story. I also did not read this. I think this will come up a little more when I'm a little bit less stressed with school and stuff. And I know that as the Giller Prize comes, which is a Canadian prize that celebrates both novels and short stories, I will be reading short stories. There's a number of short stories that are on my list, and I wanted 2023 to be the year of the play because I love plays. So I know that as Stratford Festival comes and as other things comes, I am planning on reading several plays. So I'm just waiting for the stress to come when I can fully envelop myself. That was very creepy. And the next one is a book by a disabled author. I did not read any of these either. I have on my list that I didn't read a book by a disabled author, but I obviously read Therese Escon, so that's a lie. I read one in January. Anyways, did not check that off properly. And I definitely do want to highlight this better than I have. I said I have a disability, have chronic pain and fatigue, and I'm also in the process of being diagnosed with MS. So yeah, disability is the hugest thing in my life that, you know, interacts with every other area of my life. So I do want to promote and talk about disabled authors more. Emily from Novelle Novels is hosting a readathon in May that I'm really, really excited about. That's going to be the Spoonie readathon, looking at disability. Spoons is a metaphor for pain and energy that we often use. So the idea is you have a certain amount of spoons per day, and, you know, doing basic tasks like, you know, showering or making food or standing up sometimes, you know, takes spoons. So how many spoons do you have, and whether you sleep well or not, you have more or less spoons. So I'm very excited for that readathon, and I'm very excited about reading more disabled authors. And the last one is always the most embarrassing, which is how many books by owned authors did you read? The answer is 1. Metamorphosis comes again, and yeah. I have a lot of books on my shelves. I have like 600 books, and many of them are unread, probably like a good 300 of them. And do I read them consistently? No. Many of them are classics, which I know that like I will get to eventually and all of those things. Anyways, I'm looking at shame at my beautiful bookshelves. I do believe that book collection is beautiful. I have actually had a record amount of people borrowing my books in the last few months, and that has made me so happy. From people loving A Song of Achilles or Taylor Jenkins Reads to, you know, my friends who borrowed Percy Jackson and haven't read it since they were 10 and fell in love with it again. I just really love it and really enjoy the fact that I get to lend out books that people will fall in love with. So I think I should also always clarify that the reason why I don't read a lot of the books that I own is also because I don't buy a lot of the books that I want to read. I read a lot of audiobooks, and also I don't have a lot of disposable income. So I exclusively shop at used bookstores. So if I do buy a new book, it's normally because I really, really love the book and I've already read it. So it's always pretty much put on my already read shelf. I also buy all of my clothes used, which is why I have some interesting things. I like to believe that this makes me seem like I'm from the 1980s. And it makes me very happy. I want to talk about some books that I might read to remedy these things, and books that, you know, when I check in June, which I'm very bad at doing the mid-year check-in, I somehow are much better at the first and third quarter check-ins than the mid and final. I think because those check-ins tend to scare me more. They just seem more, I don't know, pressure, so I never do them. So I do the less important ones. Anyways, I really love her. Anyways, I want to talk about some of the books. I'm not going to talk about them in any detail. I'm just going to mention them. So first of all, for Indigenous books, I have Post-Colonial Love Poem, and this is by Natalie Diaz, and this is a book that I already started. I read a fair amount of it, and it's a poetry collection, and I will get back to it when I have a little more time to read it. Crow and Blue Iris are also 2 poetry collections that I'm currently in the midst of. So back to Indigenous books, I have In My Own Moccasins. This is a memoir that I'm super excited for. I have Night on the Living Res, which is a short story collection that I am so excited for. It really, really sounds like it's going to be a book that I love. I have Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which is a nonfiction book about the history of Indigenous people in the American West. I thought that this was by an Indigenous author, and it's not, but it does seem to be well received and credited and accepted by the Indigenous community. Birchwood Forever, and this is by Danielle Daniel, and I really like her illustrations, and I've been looking forward to reading more of her work. This is a middle grade fantasy novel. My 20th century books and my plays and short stories can be combined. I really want to read Bliss by Catherine Mansfield, and I also really want to read Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams, which is a play. And 19th century, I really want to read Aurora Leigh. This is a long-form poem about the biography of a writer and is partly based on Elizabeth Barrett Browning's own life, and I'm super, super psyched for this one. I also plan to start and maybe finish The Tenant of Wildfell Hill in the next few months. For Latinx books, we have Jawbone, and this is a horror novel that I had out for the library, and the fact that I had to do assignments and not finish it still makes me deeply upset. So I cannot wait. I love horror novels, and I love when they are done well and done with a female presence in there. Then I have How Not to Drown in a Cup of Water by Angie Cruz. I've been really excited to read this and also her work Dominicana for several years, so I hope to get to it. I really need to stop putting it off. Also, another book that I'm super excited for is Sons of the Household. This book looks incredible. I just discovered it, and it's YA, and it's based on a Costa Rican Indigenous family of 2 boys who have dealt with a lot of violence, and they also replay violence when they are bullied or treated badly, and then they are looking at the history of violence in their family, and are they always stuck in this cycle. The cover is gorgeous, and I can't get it on audiobook, so I would be reading it as an ebook, but I still think I want to read it. I don't know, it might be put off because it's an ebook, which is not my favorite kind of books to read, but I am really excited for this one. The last one that I will talk about is a disabled author. I have many books that I want to read. One of the ones at the top of my list is Easy Beauty. This is a memoir about beauty standards and the way that it influences and interacts with people with disabilities. I have True Biz, which is a novel that looks at a deaf school and their experience of life. I have A Face for Picasso, and this is one of the ones that I'm most excited for. I follow the author on Instagram, and I've really enjoyed her story and talking about her experiences of facial difference and the way that people treat her for that. And I'm really excited to read this story. And then I really hope, and this is another ebook, so who knows, but Elena Knows has been on my list for a while. I believe that it was both on the long list for the International Booker, and it was also on the Barbellion Prize, who highlights authors who have disabilities. And so many of those books are so exciting, but because it's a British prize, like, all of those books are really expensive or only published in the UK, and I'm always like, I just want to read them. So yeah, those are the books and some of the things that I think I want to read. I might do a thing based on own books because, and TBR always, you know, sometimes incites me to do it, and I have so many books that I could list, and it really depends on the mood, but I have a lot of books on my shelves that I am excited about. So yeah, let me know how you are doing your goals. Do you do goals? Do you have a laissez-faire aspect to goals as me? And what other books do you recommend for these categories? I hope to see you next time.